Hello everybody, if it's your first time with us today, welcome, and if you've been here before, welcome back. This week we're going to continue our Game of the Week segments for the Jacksonville Chess for Charity Club group. And this last weekend on Saturday, we had a Blitz tournament going on at the Pablo Creek Library. A lot of competition showed up. Some very exciting games were played. However, the one thing that we do get with Blitz is a lot of fun, exciting games, and not a lot of notation, not a lot of chance to go back, review, and recap some of those games. So rather than bring you any of the highlights from that Blitz segment that unfortunately we weren't able to capture this weekend, we're going to shine a Scholastic spotlight on two of our young and up-and-coming players from the club. So this video is going to focus on a game that was played between Ryan Ratliff and Bhavi Chandra Hassan. So these are two of our young and up-and-coming promising players, and Ryan had the white pieces in this game against Bhavi. Let's go ahead, dive right in, and see how some of these up-and-coming Scholastic players fared in their game. So Ryan kicked things off with e4. We're going for a king's pawn opening in this one. e5, knight f3, and knight c6. So already both sides are fighting for their share of the center in our classical king's pawn opening. White came out with bishop c4, and this is going to begin the Italian game. So in the Italian, white develops this bishop to the nice a2, g8 diagonal, and immediately begins to pressure that f7 square. If black, for example, plays knight f6, developing and attacking the e4 pawn, white could continue with knight g5, immediately going for the f7 square and entering the very exciting fried liver attack. However, in this game, Bhavi did not want his opponent to dive straight for that f7 square, and we had the move bishop c5, entering the famous Jaco piano, a very classical opening, and one in which there is a lot of flexibility for the white pieces. Now, with Ryan's next move, he played a less popular line in this opening. More traditionally in the Jaco piano, the main line, you're going to see white play the move c3, and after something like d6, d4, immediately attacking the bishop and taking space in the center. However, white doesn't have to go for this sort of setup, and can play more closed lines with moves like d3 or castles immediately. So Ryan chose the line knight to c3, and the reason why knight c3 is perhaps the least popular of these moves is that black's normal developing move is going to be knight to f6 next. So knight c3, the only slight problem is that if you play d3 instead, after knight f6, now you have the ability to develop the bishop to g5, where you can pin this knight. And this can be bothersome for black, because black has already developed his bishop out to c5. If he wants to release the pin, he'll either have to move it back or simply start pushing pawns with things like h6 and g5. So this is a pretty normal idea. However, knight to c3, it doesn't allow for the bishop to immediately come to g5. So after knight f6 and d3, if black wants to, they can play the move h6 and stop this bishop to g5 idea. This is the position that we did get in the game, and rather than playing h6, which would be what I would recommend for black here, controlling the square and preventing the pin, Bhavi played the symmetrical approach, and we're going to go into a position that looks the exact same on both sides after the move d6. So what do you do, Scholastic players, when you end up in these positions? You're playing white, and black is mirroring all of your moves. So suddenly, everything looks exactly the same. e4, e5, d3, d6. The bishops are both out, and you've got mirror images of one another. How are we going to break up this symmetry? Well, this is a fairly common line in this. Most common, the next moves are h3 and h6 for those reasons we talked about, preventing the bishops from coming out and pinning the knights. However, in this game, Ryan decided to try to immediately break up that symmetry with the move bishop to e3. So this is putting pressure on the two bishops facing off against each other. And the point here is that if white forces the idea of keeping that symmetry, white is going to have a way to turn things into his favor. So for example, if black plays bishop e6, intending to simply keep all the symmetry in the position, white can go ahead and take this bishop, bishop takes c5. And after black intends to keep the symmetry, bishop takes c4. If we really try to keep forcing it, we can go bishop d6, bishop takes d3, and now white can play queen takes d3. And what this does is makes it where if black retakes queen d6, we can take on d6, and now we're going to end up no longer symmetrical, and after a move like castles kingside, white gets nice play on the d file against black's backwards d pawn. So even though the queens are off the board, white still has nice pressure in this position and will be able to target this weakness for the rest of the game. Another idea after the move bishop to e6 from black would be to play bishop takes e6, where now if black intends to force the symmetry with bishop takes e3, he won't be able to do it after bishop takes f7 with check, the desperado. So playing a check is always going to break up the symmetry because now your opponent has to do something about being in check. And after king takes f7, pawn takes e3 rather. Now white is up a central pawn. He has 3-2 here. Black's king is stuck on the f file, so white can castle and put the rook in line with black's king to potentially attack there. And this would also work very well for white. So for these reasons, after bishop to e3, black should not play bishop to e6 because white has a couple different ways to take advantage of that. And instead black plays the move bishop to b6, solidifying this bishop, which is now defended by 2 pawns. Conversely, if white chooses to take this bishop, then a takes b6 would open up black's rook, give him a nice file to play with, and move one of your pawns toward the center to support future pawn advances like c6, c5, and d5. So white doesn't really want to take this either, and white's going to castle next. Now again, I still think the moves h3 and h6 may be slightly more precise in order to prevent some of these bishops from coming to g4 and g5, preventing some of those pins. But Bhavi went ahead and castled, and now white plays the move queen d2. So this takes another approach to preventing the bishop g4 move. Now we're simply allowing it, so if black plays bishop g4, there's no longer a pin here, and white can simply move his knight, maybe something like knight to e1 to prepare the push of the f-pawn. So Bhavi doesn't play the move bishop g4. Instead, we see black now play bishop e6. And now, after white moves bishop b3, we're back to almost the same symmetry again. Bhavi plays queen d7, and look at that. Even though we had broken up that symmetry a few moves ago, once again, we're right back to it. So we're going to have to find a way to break this up all over again. Now, one thing that white could do, we could use one of those same ideas we showed before, right? A check will break up the symmetry. So one way, if you're really trying to force it, is we could play the move bishop takes e6, because of course if black plays bishop takes e3, we can use the same idea. Bishop takes f7, the desperado with check, and that will break things up. However, the problem is after bishop takes e6, there's no need for black to force symmetry anymore, and f takes e6 simply opens up the f-file for the rook to be able to get into the game and provides nice support for a d5 push. So white doesn't want to strengthen black's central control, and instead plays the move bishop g5, finally going back to some of those ideas we mentioned earlier. We never played h6 or h3, and so the bishop can find a home on g5 and pressure the knight. Well, now, of course, the threat's a little different. The knight is no longer pinned, but because it's not pinned, if white is allowed to capture it, or if black provokes it with a move like h6, then after bishop takes knight, g takes bishop, and queen h6, this attack looks very, very strong for white. The king is all alone, stranded out here against black's pieces. Maybe knight h4 is going to be coming. Maybe the knight will hop into d5 and pressure f6. Maybe white can even play king h1 and f4 in the next couple moves. White has a lot of ways to try to continue with the attack and is already up a pawn. So black certainly does not want to allow this sort of thing and has to do something about the pressure on the knight. Now here Bhavi plays a little bit inaccurately. Remember, the ideas behind queen d2 and queen d7 is that since we moved out of these potential pins, we can simply move our knight away. So here black, I think, would be better after the move knight h5. This prepares for things like f6 or maybe h6 and g4, followed by the knight coming to f4. So if you can imagine, let's say that white plays a move like rook to d1, you could continue with h6, and if the bishop came back to h4, maybe even g4, bishop here, and knight f4, and look at this knight on this f4 square. Moves like f5 could be coming, and black is going to be getting some big pressure coming on the king side. This could be one potential line to happen. Of course, black doesn't have to play in this way, but these are ways that he could build up a very quick pressure against the white pieces. However, Bhavi plays the move queen to e7, and though this is a solid move and it defends everything, the problem is with black's last two moves, we played the move queen to d7 and queen to e7, and this is taking two moves to bring the queen to a square where it still is going to allow the knight to be pinned. So the queen hasn't improved itself very much, the knight is pinned, and now white can start to dream of taking over the initiative a little bit. And how is white going to do that? Well, when you have a pinned piece, what do you want to do with that piece? Attack it. So white plays the move knight to d5, creating immediate threats against the queen and the f6 knight. If black plays a move like queen d8, white can capture on f6 with either the bishop or the knight, and black will be forced to take with the g-pawn and have his structure completely ruined. So black is pretty much forced in this position to play bishop takes d5. White plays bishop takes d5, and now the symmetry is officially broken. White has traded off a knight for a bishop, so white has managed to secure the two bishops in this game, which has the potential to open up with moves like c3 and d4, so that's a nice advantage for white to have in the long term. And white still enjoys a pin against this f6 knight. So overall, a nice looking position for the moment. Let's see if black can find a way to untangle. Bhavi plays the move h6, and bishop h4 keeps the pin against the knight. And now we see the move knight to d4, and knight to d4 is another mistake. Well, this one is a mistake from black. Where queen e7 was an inaccuracy, knight d4 gives white the chance to win a full pawn. So how can you win a pawn in this position with the white pieces? Well, first of all, let's see what black's idea is with knight d4. The move itself creates an immediate threat. Black would like to play knight takes f3, where now white's going to have to recapture with the g-pawn, and then be the one whose kingside pawn structure gets ruined. So we have to do something about this immediate threat against our f3 knight. Of course, we can simply take this knight, and that would be one way to deal with it. We could move the knight away if we want to think about pushing our f-pawn. Maybe playing c3 and kicking the knight. So a couple different options for white to deal with it, but how can we win that pawn? Well, after knight takes d4 and bishop takes d4, there's a couple things that have happened. When this knight moved away from the c6 square, our d5 bishop is now opened on the b7 square. However, black is threatening our b2 pawn the same. So how can we deal with the threat to our b2 pawn and then manage to take that b7 pawn? The move for white to win a pawn in this position would be c3. So with c3, black's bishop is under attack, is going to have to move away, something like bishop to b6. And now after bishop takes b7, threatening the black rook, black will play something like rook b8, and white can play his bishop either to c6 or d5 or a6, wherever you so happen to choose to place your bishop, and white will be up a pawn with the two bishops still in a nice position. Unfortunately, this is the one chance that Ryan did miss in the game to get a concrete advantage in material. And after knight takes d4, bishop takes d4, we played the immediate bishop takes b7. So Ryan immediately captures on the b7 square. And the problem with this is that it grabs the pawn slightly too early. So after rook a b8, now the bishop is going to have to move, and this b2 pawn comes under fire. So bishop to d5, and here we have another very interesting tactical moment occur. So what is one way for Bhavi to win back the pawn, but not only simply grab this b2 pawn, but perhaps try to equalize? And here comes a very creative idea from the black pieces. And go ahead, pause your video for a moment. So rather than taking the b2 pawn, what's another idea for black to win back his pawn and offer up a way to trade down into a bishop of opposite color ending? See if you can take a look at this and find the offer that Bhavi comes up with. So Bhavi plays the shocking move, knight takes e4, right? What a stunner. Moving the knight right into danger where it can be captured, and also releasing the pin by allowing white to capture your own queen on e7. So what's the point behind this move? Well, of course, if white takes your queen, which is what Ryan plays in the game, the knight can capture the queen on d2, and now both rooks are also under attack. After bishop takes f8 and knight takes f1, black's managed to win back his pawn. However, this was one last chance for white to keep the advantage here, and the two players ended up taking each other's pieces. In the game, we saw rook takes f1 and king takes f8, which led to a very equal endgame quickly. What could white play in this position, though? How could white try to keep the advantage? One last chance to enter an endgame with some long-term chances. Well, here, white should play the move bishop to e7. And the idea is that by not trading this knight for this bishop, black is going to have to save the knight, and white will retain two bishops against the bishop and knight and the endgame, and have the opportunity to really open up the board. And on an open board, these two bishops can be a major advantage in the game to come. So even though material is equal, and it would not be an easy game for white to win, the two bishops should show their strength in this sort of endgame. White can continue with moves like c3. Maybe the bishop will drop back to a square like b3 to prevent here. Of course, that would allow a trade. But white has a lot of different ideas. We want to keep the bishops on the board and look to create weaknesses in black's position. So this was white's last chance to prevent equality. Unfortunately, in the game, as we said, we had rook takes f1, king takes f8, and after c3 and bishop to b6, now we are entering an endgame where the material is exactly equal, and it's going to be very hard for either side to create targets and win this game. We have material equality, and the bishops of opposite colors here are the key. White has his bishop on the light squares. There's not many squares to attack in black's camp. Only f7 exists there right now. Black's bishop is on the dark squares, and though white has a pawn on b2, we can very easily play moves like b3 and c4, or even simply place the bishop on b3. So lots of options for white here to secure the position, and for black as well. A few more moves are made: bishop to b3, bishop c5, and rook to e1, f5, g3, and c6. And in this position, after the 23rd move, a draw was agreed. Neither player was able to see a good way to break through with the opposite colored bishops. Now, of course, this game could still be played for a very long time. There are now a couple targets to attack. There's some light squares here for white's bishop to maybe come to a4 or e6. But black is going to play securing moves like g6, move the king into the game when he gets the chance. And it's going to be very hard for either side to create enough weaknesses to break through in this. Even if one side manages to win a pawn or even two pawns, if the rooks come off the board, very often these bishops of opposite colors can be draws. So in order to win this game, some key ideas are create weaknesses, try to target them, and keep the rooks on the board. If the rooks come off the board, it's going to almost certainly be a draw in this game. One was agreed anyway, but those are the techniques and things to consider if you want to keep pressing in these sort of games, keep playing them on to the bitter end. I love to do it myself because, well, if I'm going to show up to play chess, I might as well play all the way to the end, but sometimes, especially if there's time trouble, which happens often in these quick games, we are happy to agree to a draw. This was a game 25 game played, and I cannot say exactly how low both players were on the clock, but plenty of time had been used up by this point. So a very nice game from our two young players. Ryan showed an early opening advantage in this one, and Bhavi came up with some very creative ways to equalize back in the end. And both players show some great promise. I look forward to seeing all of you come out. On Saturdays, the Chess for Charity group will be at the Pablo Creek Library. Come out, make sure to compete in what's coming up there. And on Wednesdays, if you're interested in learning more chess as well, we've got some great lectures going on Wednesdays at our other regional library. Be sure to check out our Facebook page, Chess for Charity, for more information on that. Best of luck to you, and looking forward to seeing you in the weeks to come.